Province.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all my colleagues who have spoken so eloquently here this past many hours. It will come as no surprise to my colleagues that I'm opposed to medical assistance in dying and also opposed to any expansion thereof, but I will be voting in favor of this bill, Bill C-39, because what it will do is it will extend and delay the imminent move that this Liberal government wants to move, which is extending MAID to those with mental illnesses. When MAID first came to this House and was presented by this Liberal government, I was on the Justice Committee, and I early on warned this House that MAID was going to be a slippery slope. Reasonably foreseeable would not remain the standard by which MAID cases would be adjudicated, and how this legislation would also pose a serious threat to those with disabilities, the elderly, the poor, and particularly those with mental health issues. In August of this last year, the Associated Press and National Post both published reports on what's been happening in Canada's hospitals since this Liberal government introduced one of the most permissive assisted suicide regimens in the world. The results are alarming. In an interview, Tim Staton, director of UBC's Canadian Institute for Inclusion and Citizenship, one of our leading experts on the subject, called MAID the biggest existential threat to disabled people since the Nazis' program in Germany in the 1930s. A follow-up article in Forbes magazine, an article written by journalist Gus Alexio, who himself suffers from multiple sclerosis, writes, "Unfettered accessibility to MAID could prove to be one of the most malignant forces of the disability community, including those with mental disability or illness, has had to contend with since the mercy killings of the Third Reich almost 9 decades ago." Why? Because their reporting discovered that the people who are being targeted for MAID, and I don't think that's too wrong a word to use as targeted, are the most vulnerable Canadians, those who are disabled, seniors, those living in poverty, and those with a mental illness. Their story begins with Alan from BC, who suffered from severe depression. He was administered MAID shortly after being taken to the hospital for a psychiatric episode. His family begged the doctors not to kill him, as he had been involuntarily admitted and was in the throes of a psychotic episode when he demanded MAID. The family's pleas were ignored, and Alan was dead shortly thereafter. As Dr. Mark Comrade, a psychologist at Johns Hopkins University, accurately predicted, your law, when he's talking about Canadians, will provide and not prevent suicide for psychiatric patients. Alan's death was not a reasonably foreseeable death. He was killed because he had a mental health condition. Then there was a disturbing incident where a Veterans Affairs agent casually offered MAID to a veteran with PTSD and traumatic brain injury, something they had no business doing. And so, to their credit, the government dealt with that employee, and I commend them for that, as I commend them for taking this pause on MAID expansion. I was in government, and I know how hard it is to think back, or to walk back on things, and it takes courage to do that, and so I'm glad this government has seen fit to do that. But it turns out this one veteran incident wasn't an isolated incident. It was one of 6 incidents that we know of where it was suggested that veterans should consider assisted death. Moreover, let's be clear that what we're talking about, because as I listened to the Justice Minister and read some of what has been put into print, it doesn't sound like he's convinced that those with mental illness shouldn't receive MAID. It just sounds like he wasn't ready to go. CBC on February the 2nd of this past year quoted him saying, "COVID slowed everything down. To be honest, we could have gone forward with the original date, but we wanted to be sure, we wanted to be safe, we wanted everybody to be on the same page. We want in, particularly with those health practitioners, those faculties of medicine, colleges who had some concerns, to have time to internalize what is happening." Let me read that sentence again. We want in, particular with those health practitioners, those faculties of medicine, colleges who had some concerns, to have time to internalize what is happening. That doesn't sound like an about-face to me, Madam Speaker. That sounds like the minister and the government still have every intention of moving forward with this. A 2021 report by the UN warned Canada's liberalization of euthanasia poses dire threats to its elderly and infirm populations. That threat certainly includes those suffering with mental illness. It goes on, there is a grave concern that if assisted death is made available for all persons with a health condition or impairment, including mental health, a social assumption might follow that it is better to be dead than to live with a disability. Given what we have seen to date, that certainly appears to be the case. Just a little less than a year ago, last February, I received an email from a constituent, not my constituent, but a constituent of a Liberal member of Parliament, and it was sent to several MPs, and I would like, Madam Speaker, to read that into the record. It comes from a woman with the name of Melissa, and this is what she says. I was the furthest thing from being a productive member of society. 15 years ago, I was struggling really bad. I had entered into my second year of grade 10, which was due to a mental health diagnosis. I was diagnosed with PTSD, a personality disorder, major depressions, and I had anxiety and was on a bunch of antipsychotics. I was in and out of crisis stabilization units, psych wards, and a couple years later, I got kicked out of a safe home for youth. I got kicked out of school and home because I was overdosing on the prescription medication and was self-mutilating. I was a lost cause and didn't want to live, and suicide was the only way out from all this pain, or so I thought. I was a prime candidate for MAID since my condition was nearly impossible to overcome, apart from a miracle. I was a burden on my family, the medical system, the education system, and on top of it, all that, I had chronic stomach issues and back pain, which I would frequent the hospitals for. If I had an open door to access MAID, that would have been something I would have seriously considered, and I would not be here to tell you my story. There are so many young teens like myself grow up in broken homes and get stuck in hopelessness and despair, and there are others who have everything they could ever want, yet still suffer from issues affecting their mental and physical health. Not everyone overcomes, and it gets carried into their adult life, which makes them eligible for medical assistance in dying. When you make that choice to go through with MAID, you no longer have an opportunity to go back and reconsider your decision. I know people suffer and life can be tough, and there are moments that seem unbearable, but there is hope. I've been there before. I suffered for over 10 years. I started on antidepressants by the age of 12, and by the middle of high school, I had lost my mind, and I just wanted to end it. Yes, taking life is a very serious matter. I met Jesus, who became my hope. I know that the name of Jesus has been frequently misrepresented, but the Jesus I met truly takes away needless pain and suffering. And then she addresses her Liberal member of Parliament and asks them to reconsider the support that they would have for this particular bill. Madam Speaker, sadly, this is happening in Canada at the same time as we're growing a serious healthcare crisis that's been exacerbated by years of COVID, restrictions, and delays. Millions of Canadians are unable to access primary care, and wait times for doctors, appointments, surgeries, mental health support, and emergency room visits are among the longest in the developed world. Since it was expanded, MAID has seen a dramatic upswing, exacerbated by COVID-19, and the inability of too many Canadians to access timely and proper health care, including a lack of mental health supports. In fact, in an Angus Reid survey that just came out today, 55% of Canadians are worried that expansion of MAID will become a substitute for social services. You know, an ER doctor recently told my office that prior to COVID, mental health cases accounted for 1 in every 7 ER visits. Post-COVID, post-restrictions, that number is 1 in 3. Now, according to research in the National Post, 2020 saw a 17% increase in MAID deaths over 2019, disproportionately involving the elderly. I see no reason why we will not see an even more significant jump if MAID legislation is permanently expanded to include mental illness. Madam Speaker, I can see my time is running out, so I want to close with this. I recognize that for many for whom every day is a struggle, for whom mental health and physical health issues are debilitating, I won't begin to pretend that I know what it's like, and I want to be sensitive to that. But I believe that every human life, whatever the contents and challenges of that life may be, holds an innate and sacred dignity. Only God can give life, and only God should be able to take life. It is my deeply held conviction that from the conception to natural death, life is a precious gift. It is the role of government to seek the best for all its citizens. We must adopt policies that embrace that gift, policies that uphold life and reinforce the value of every citizen. As Pope Francis put it in his recent Canadian tour, we need to learn how to listen to the pain of patients who, in place of affection, are administered death. We need to be there for the elderly, the infirm, the disabled. We need to be there for those who are suffering from mental illness, not offering the needle.
I have been